Have you ever felt as though you were shouldering an unbearable burden? Jonathan Roumie, at 51, had reached his absolute breaking point. Portraying Jesus Christ for millions had become an overwhelming burden, and he was ready to abandon everything. But then one frigid October pre-dawn, his phone rang. On the other end of the line was a mysterious voice that possessed impossible knowledge, intimate details of his life he had never shared with anyone. A voice that uttered a precise prophecy about something that would unfold the very next day. And when that prophecy materialized exactly as foretold, Jonathan's life was irrevocably altered. But who was this individual? How did they possess such inexplicable insight? And what truly transpired when Jonathan decided to disclose this story for the first time on America's most renowned radio program? Brace yourself for a revelation that challenges everything you comprehend about coincidences. The studio lights of America's most renowned radio program gleamed with an almost mesmerizing intensity that Tuesday afternoon in Manhattan. At 51 years of age, Jonathan Roumie fidgeted uneasily in the black leather chair that had hosted scores of luminaries over the decades. His hands, subtly trembling, clutched an antiquated Nokia phone, a model that appeared to have emerged directly from the early aughts. The actor, of Lebanese and Irish descent, wore his brown hair slightly disheveled, and his dark eyes held an intensity that transcended the typical pre-interview jitters. Howard, I'm fully aware this will sound utterly preposterous, but I feel compelled to share something that irrevocably altered my life. Something that transpired on this very phone I'm holding. Howard Stern observed his guest with that acute curiosity that had cemented his status as a radio legend after 4 decades on the airwaves. The host, with his distinctive curly hair and dark spectacles, leaned slightly forward at his desk, instantly discerning that something out of the ordinary was unfolding at that very moment. His seasoned intuition told him Jonathan was not merely there to promote the new season of Need the Chosen. There was a palpable urgency in his gestures, an almost desperate need to be heard and, crucially, to be believed. In 40 years of broadcasting, Jonathan, Howard stated, I've become adept at reading people like open books, and I sense you haven't merely come here to discuss your professional endeavors, have you? Jonathan took a deep breath, his fingers gently caressing the worn surface of the Nokia phone as though it were a sacred talisman. The studio, typically brimming with the irreverent energy that characterized Howard's program, was enveloped in an almost reverential silence. The sound engineers ceased their usual activities, and even Robin Quivers, the seasoned co-host, observed intently from the adjacent booth. Jonathan understood he was on the precipice of revealing something that could fundamentally alter public perception of him, yet he also felt an unignorable inner compulsion. Howard, I have never divulged this to anyone, not even the series producers. But what happened with this phone 3 years ago was not merely strange or a coincidence. The actor adjusted his posture in the chair, his taut muscles betraying the anxiety he felt as he was about to divulge his deepest secret. He wore a simple navy blue shirt that starkly contrasted with the pallor of his face, and his hands continued to tremble slightly as he mentally organized the words he would use to recount a story that defied all logic. Howard remained silent, allowing the moment to unfold naturally, his experience telling him that he was about to witness something truly extraordinary. The microphones captured every breath, every subtle movement, creating an atmosphere of anticipation that could be palpably felt through the airwaves. It was something I can only describe as a real and tangible encounter with God, and I have physical proof of it right here in my hands. Howard leaned even further forward, his eyes fixed on the antique phone Jonathan held as if it were the most precious object in the world. The host had interviewed presidents, movie stars, legendary musicians, and even people who claimed to have been abducted by aliens. But there was something about Jonathan's intensity that was profoundly different. It wasn't the pursuit of attention or fame that he was accustomed to witnessing. It was the genuine urgency of someone who had experienced something that utterly transcended his previous understanding of reality. Robin also leaned closer to her microphone, clearly intrigued by the direction the interview was taking. Jonathan, you know our listeners have heard virtually everything over the years, but for the first time in decades, I can feel that something truly unprecedented is about to unfold here in the studio. The actor ran his fingers through his hair, a nervous gesture that betrayed the magnitude of what he was about to share. He looked directly at Howard, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of fear and determination. The burden of the responsibility of portraying Jesus Christ in the most watched series about the life of Christ had become almost unbearable in recent years, especially after what had transpired on that fateful night 3 years prior. He knew his revelation might be construed as a publicity stunt, or worse, as a symptom of mental unraveling. Yet the imperative to share his experience eclipsed any apprehension. Howard, you're going to think I've entirely lost my mind, and perhaps some of your listeners will too. But the real question isn't whether anyone will believe me or not. Jonathan held up his Nokia phone slightly, as if presenting a sacred relic to a congregation of the devout. The studio lights glinted off the device's small dark screen, casting ephemeral gleams that danced across the walls. He could feel the collective scrutiny of Howard, Robin, and the entire technical crew, acutely aware that millions of listeners nationwide were also hanging on his every word. The responsibility was crushing, yet he had come too far to retreat now. His decision to reveal what had transpired that night had been forged over months of prayer and contemplation, and he knew the auspicious moment had arrived. The real question is whether the world is truly prepared to hear what happened that night, when I was literally minutes away from abandoning everything. Howard's brow furrowed, his professional curiosity fully piqued. He had developed an unerring knack for discerning between attention seekers and those with genuinely significant revelations. Jonathan clearly fell into the latter category, and the intensity of his emotion was palpable even through the microphones. The host gestured for his technical team to maintain absolute silence, comprehending he was witnessing a moment that could become one of the most memorable in his show's history. Robin also remained utterly still, her years of experience telling her something extraordinary was unfolding before them. Jonathan, when you say abandoning everything, are you referring specifically to The Chosen? Or was there something more profound unfolding in your life at that juncture? The actor closed his eyes for a moment, allowing the memories of that dreadful night 3 years prior to resurface with agonizing clarity. He could recall the sheer desperation he had felt, the sensation of bearing an unbearable burden, the weight of fan expectations, the desperate pleas he received daily, the relentless pressure to adequately portray the most pivotal figure in human history. All these factors had converged to forge a perfect storm of anxiety and self-doubt. He slowly opened his eyes, fixing his gaze once more on Howard with an intensity that caused the veteran host to shiver slightly. Howard, I was receiving thousands upon thousands of messages every single day. Mothers on the brink of despair pleading with me to pray for their children who were dying in hospitals. Jonathan continued, his voice gaining strength as he delved deeper into his painful memories. People who genuinely believed I was Jesus Christ incarnate, and that I could somehow deliver them from their suffering and tragedies. And Howard, I was merely a Jewish and Irish actor from New York who was desperately grappling with his own faith and identity. He paused, allowing the gravity of his words to settle over the studio before continuing. The pressure was so relentless that I had utterly lost the ability to sleep soundly, to focus on anything, or even to find any semblance of inner peace. Howard slowly nodded, beginning to grasp the sheer magnitude of the psychological burden Jonathan had endured. The host had interviewed numerous celebrities over the years who grappled with public expectations, but Jonathan's predicament was unique in its spiritual intensity. Portraying Jesus Christ was not merely a role, it was a responsibility that utterly transcended the normal purview of entertainment. Robin, too, evinced clear signs of comprehension and empathy, her years of journalistic experience enabling her to recognize the authenticity of Jonathan's anguish. So you were contending not merely with standard professional pressure, but with spiritual expectations no human being should ever have to shoulder alone. That must have been utterly devastating. Jonathan nodded vigorously, visibly relieved to have his experience validated by someone of Howard's credibility and experience. Precisely, Howard. And on that particular night, 3 years ago, I had finally reached my absolute breaking point. I had spent hours drafting and redrafting an email to Dallas Jenkins, the creator and director of The Chosen, formally conveying my decision to permanently depart from the series. He raised the Nokia phone once more, his fingers tracing the device's worn edges. But then, at 2:45 in the morning, this phone rang with a call that would irrevocably alter the trajectory of my life in ways I could never have conceived. A profound silence permeated the studio, with everyone present visibly engrossed in Jonathan's narrative. Howard adjusted his headphones, bracing himself for what promised to be one of the most extraordinary stories ever recounted on his program. Jonathan, before you continue, I must inquire about something crucial. This phone you're holding, is it still functional? And do you still possess any records of that enigmatic call? Jonathan smiled for the first time since his arrival at the studio, a smile that commingled sorrow, wonder, and a profound faith, forged through an experience that defied all rational elucidation. Howard, not only is this phone still functional, but I've preserved it precisely as it was that night. And regarding records, he paused dramatically, gazing directly into the camera broadcasting the program. Well, that's where the narrative truly transcends logical explanation. Jonathan's Brooklyn Heights apartment was enveloped in an almost oppressive gloom on that early October morning in 2021, with only the faint luminescence of the desk lamp in the corner of the room casting elongated shadows across walls adorned with family photographs and posters from his earlier endeavors. The stillness was punctuated solely by the distant murmur of traffic still traversing the Brooklyn Bridge and the insistent cadence of the wall clock that had once belonged to his paternal grandmother. Jonathan had been ensconced at his work desk for over 4 consecutive hours, his fingers nervously dancing across the laptop keyboard as he meticulously sought the precise phrasing to articulate a decision that held the potential to irrevocably alter the course of his career. The brightly lit computer screen showcased the 10th iteration of an email addressed to Dallas Jenkins, and each word committed to the digital page seemed to impose the crushing weight of a mountain upon his fatigued shoulders. How can I explain to him that I simply cannot bear this pressure any longer without appearing to be a coward? How can I make Dallas comprehend that I am failing not merely as an actor, but as a human being? The table was completely covered with printed correspondence that arrived daily in his mailbox, hundreds upon hundreds of handwritten letters from people across the country who saw in him not just a talented actor, but a direct conduit to the divine. Jonathan randomly selected one of the letters and opened it once more, reading the desperate words of a mother from Cincinnati whose 8-year-old son was hospitalized in a terminal condition with an aggressive form of leukemia. The woman had written with a tremulous hand that her sole remaining hope was that Jonathan, the man who portrayed Jesus on television, might intercede with God for a miracle that doctors had already declared impossible. Her tears had blurred parts of the blue ink, creating small smudges that resembled frozen tears on the paper, and at the bottom of the letter, she had affixed a photograph of the boy smiling in a hospital bed, surrounded by tubes and medical equipment. Dear Jonathan, I know you must receive thousands of requests such as this every day, but please, just one prayer for my Benjamin, because I believe God speaks through you when you portray his son. Jonathan set the letter aside with a mixture of compassion and despair that had become all too familiar over the past few months, feeling the overwhelming burden of responsibility that millions of viewers had placed upon his shoulders without him ever having solicited it. He walked to the window that overlooked the East River, watching the lights of the city that never sleeps twinkling like terrestrial stars in the pre-dawn darkness. His reflection in the glass showed a visibly exhausted man, with deep circles under his eyes and unshaven stubble that betrayed days of neglecting his personal appearance. The apartment, normally a sanctuary of peace and creativity, had transformed into an emotional prison where every corner held reminders of expectations he felt utterly incapable of meeting. Perhaps Mom was wrong about God's plans for me. Perhaps I am merely an ordinary actor who was fortunate enough to land a significant role, and nothing more. Returning to his desk, Jonathan's gaze fell upon the framed photograph of his mother, which held pride of place beside his computer. An image of her beaming radiantly on her drama school graduation day, her eyes sparkling with pride and hope for her son's future. She had been a woman of unwavering faith, a Maronite Christian who immigrated from Lebanon in the 1960s, carrying only a small suitcase and a heart full of dreams for the family she intended to build in America. Throughout Jonathan's entire childhood, she would wake him every morning with a kiss on his forehead and the tender Arabic words that had become her trademark over the years. Her stories of saints and miracles had shaped young Jonathan's imagination, planting seeds of faith that now seemed to be withering under the weight of a reality that proved far more complex and challenging than any religious fairy tale. Habibi, God gave you this face and this heart for a special reason, and one day you will understand what that reason is. Never doubt the plans he has for you, even when the path seems impossible to traverse. Jonathan's attention returned to his laptop screen, where the cursor impatiently blinked, awaiting the final words that would seal his decision to abandon the chosen and consequently disappoint millions worldwide who had found hope and spiritual renewal through his portrayal of Jesus Christ. He typed and deleted the same sentence dozens of times, striving to find a diplomatic way to explain that the psychological pressure had become unbearable and that he could no longer feign possessing the spiritual answers that so many desperately sought in him. Every word seemed inadequate to express the complexity of his feelings, the sensation of living a monumental lie while millions placed their faith in someone who was secretly grappling with his own doubts about God, purpose, and meaning. The clock on the wall read 2:45 in the morning when Jonathan finally typed the words he had been avoiding for weeks. Dallas, after much reflection and prayer, I have arrived at the difficult conclusion that I need to step away from the chosen project. I feel I can no longer adequately uphold the profound responsibility of portraying Jesus Christ. Before he could continue typing or lose the resolve to send the life-altering message, the oppressive silence of the apartment was shattered by the strident ring of his Nokia phone, its insistence seeming almost preternatural in the profound stillness of the pre-dawn hours. Jonathan gazed bewildered at the handset, which lay charging on the living room coffee table. It was an antiquated model he intentionally kept for crucial personal calls, primarily owing to its multi-day battery life and its audio fidelity, which he considered superior to contemporary smartphones. The compact display merely showed unknown number, flashing in verdant text against a stark black backdrop, devoid of any area code or discernible call origin. Under normal circumstances, he would never have entertained an anonymous call at such an ungodly hour, yet an inexplicable impulse compelled him to seize the handset and press the green answer button. Who would possibly be calling me at this unearthly hour? And how did they manage to acquire this number, which virtually no one possesses? Jonathan raised the receiver to his ear, a curious blend of intrigue and trepidation washing over him. He anticipated hearing the voice of an obsessive fan who had somehow illicitly acquired his private number, or perhaps a tenacious journalist attempting to secure an exclusive interview beyond conventional hours. Instead, he was greeted by a male voice that was at once mellifluous and penetrating, imbued with an intrinsic authority that instantly caused the hairs on his arms to prickle. The voice spoke English with impeccable fluency, yet there was an underlying quality in its timbre that transcended any specific regional accent, as if it belonged to someone who had been born with innate mastery of all global tongues simultaneously. Jonathan felt an uncanny sensation course through his entire being, as if every cell were resonating with a frequency he had never before encountered. "Jonathan, Roumie? I trust I'm not disturbing your slumber, though I am quite aware you weren't actually asleep. There is something of paramount importance I need to discuss with you this night." The actor felt his heart quicken dramatically as he struggled to fathom how this caller not only knew his full name, but also the precise fact that he was awake in the dead of night, rather than being in a state of repose like any ordinary individual at such an hour. His initial reaction was one of suspicion and vexation, surmising it could be some elaborate ruse or a breach of privacy by an obsessive admirer or detractor of the chosen, who had uncovered personal information through illicit means. Jonathan anxiously surveyed the apartment, half expecting to discern concealed cameras or indications that his privacy had been compromised in some manner, but everything appeared exactly as he had left it hours earlier. The voice on the other end of the line patiently anticipated his reply, and Jonathan could almost perceive a gentle smile even without being able to see the person speaking. "Yes, this is Jonathan, but who is this? How did you get this number? And more importantly, how do you know I wasn't asleep?" The voice responded with a serenity that dramatically contrasted with Jonathan's escalating disquiet, each word uttered with a precision and clarity that made it seem as though the individual was conversing directly within his very thoughts rather than through radio waves transmitted via a telephone network. You don't know me personally, Jonathan, but I know you far more intimately than you might conceive. I know about the letters you've been reading tonight, about the despondency you've experienced over the past few weeks, and especially about the email you are writing to Dallas Jenkins at this very moment. The disclosure hit Jonathan like a bolt from the blue, prompting him to instinctively glance towards the laptop screen where his words of resignation were still in the process of being typed. Words he had not shared with any living soul on the planet. The receiver almost slipped from his quaking hands as he strove to fathom how such information could be privy to a complete stranger. I know you're contemplating quitting this very night, Jonathan. I know of the immense pressure you've been under, about the seemingly insurmountable expectations, and about how you've questioned whether you truly have the right to represent Jesus Christ before millions of people. Jonathan's legs felt suddenly weak, and he slumped heavily into the armchair adjacent to the desk. The receiver still clutched against his ear as his mind grappled to process the unfolding events. The voice continued to speak with that same gentle authority, yet now an underlying urgency permeated its tone that prompted Jonathan to realize this was neither a commonplace call nor an elaborate ruse. It was something entirely beyond the purview of his prior experience, something that challenged all his preconceived notions of how the world operated. He looked once more at his mother's photograph, as if seeking guidance or confirmation that he wasn't entirely losing his grip on reality. Who are you? How can you possibly know such intimate details about my private life? And please do not tell me you are some kind of private investigator or journalist, because I know this transcends any normal inquiry. The response came laden with a compassion that resonated with Jonathan's heart in an inexplicable way, as if the voice belonged to someone who had loved him unconditionally for far longer than any earthly relationship could encompass. Jonathan, my dear son, that is inconsequential at this juncture. What matters is that you comprehend a fundamental truth. You were not called to this role by accident or happenstance. God has something far greater planned for you, something that vastly transcends anything you can conceive in your current human state. The voice paused briefly before resuming with even greater intensity. Tomorrow, precisely at 3:33 p.m., you will receive a call from a woman named Sarah who resides in the state of Texas. Her 12-year-old son Michael is hospitalized, battling cancer, and she will relay something to you that only God could have foreknown. The midday sun blazed fiercely over the arid hills of Goshen, Utah, creating a dramatic contrast between the deep shadows cast by the theatrical set pieces and the golden luminescence that bathed the entire film set of The Chosen that October afternoon. Jonathan had arrived at the set nearly 2 hours late, his bloodshot, swollen eyes betraying a night utterly devoid of sleep, his mind still grappling with the preternatural occurrences that had transpired in his Brooklyn apartment just hours earlier. The crew members and other actors immediately noticed his haggard appearance, but no one dared to pose direct questions about his emotional state, respecting the stringent privacy Jonathan invariably maintained regarding his personal affairs. How can I possibly focus on today's scenes when my mind incessantly replays that enigmatic voice? What if I actually get a call at 3:33, just as that person said I would? Dallas Jenkins, the series director and creator, observed Jonathan from a distance with a mounting concern that had burgeoned over the past several weeks, noting unequivocal signs of physical and emotional exhaustion in his lead actor that transcended the normal weariness of an intense production. He had attempted to broach the subject on several prior occasions, but Jonathan invariably managed to deflect the conversation or offer evasive responses that unequivocally indicated his unwillingness to divulge what was truly unfolding in his personal life. He strode purposefully towards Jonathan's trailer, rapping softly on the door, before entering without awaiting a formal response. Jonathan, we need to address what's going on with you. I can no longer feign ignorance of the signs that something profoundly serious is afflicting you. Jonathan looked at Dallas with an expression that commingled gratitude and desperation, acknowledging that he had reached a point where he could no longer fully conceal the emotional burden he was carrying. He gestured for Dallas to take the opposing seat, taking a deep breath before attempting to articulate words that might convey at least a fraction of what he was experiencing without sounding utterly unhinged. The trailer was silent save for the distant murmur of the crew preparing equipment for the afternoon scenes, and Jonathan could feel the weight of his director's empathetic gaze. Dallas, I've been grappling with a pressure that far transcends anything I've ever encountered in my career. The weight of people's expectations, the desperate letters, the immense responsibility of portraying Jesus, it's all consuming me in a way I no longer know how to manage. Dallas leaned forward, his expression betraying a profound understanding of the unique challenges Jonathan faced as the protagonist of a series that had profoundly impacted millions globally in ways that entirely transcended conventional entertainment. He had closely observed how the burgeoning success of The Chosen had transformed Jonathan from a relatively obscure actor into an almost venerated figure for many, a responsibility for which no acting class could have adequately prepared anyone. He reached out and gently touched Jonathan's shoulder, a simple gesture that conveyed years of camaraderie and mutual esteem. Jonathan, I fully grasp what you're experiencing, and I want you to know you're not alone on this journey. Perhaps we should consider some adjustments to the schedule to allow you more time to process all of this. Before Jonathan could respond to Dallas's empathetic overture, the Nokia phone in his pocket began to vibrate with the same insistent urgency that had characterized the mysterious call from the previous dawn, causing his heart to quicken perceptibly as he nervously checked the time on his wristwatch. The digital display showed exactly 1,533 hours, confirming with chilling precision the specific prophecy the mysterious voice had made during that supernatural call. Jonathan felt his hands begin to tremble violently as he withdrew the phone from his pocket, again seeing the words "unknown number" flashing on the small green screen, but this time accompanied by an area code he instantly recognized as belonging to the state of Texas. Dallas, you won't believe what's about to unfold. Someone told me precisely when this call would come through and who would be on the other end of the line. Jonathan answered the phone with trembling hands, putting it on speakerphone so Dallas could hear the conversation. An impulsive decision spurred by his desperate need for a witness to what he suspected would be yet another impossible confirmation of the previous night's supernatural premonitions. The female voice that emanated from the small speaker was laden with emotion and urgency, speaking with a distinctive Texan accent which immediately corroborated the geographical origin that had been prophesied with such disquieting accuracy. The woman on the other end of the line seemed to be fighting back tears as she spoke, her voice oscillating between hope and despair in a way that instantly resonated with the hearts of both men present in the small trailer. Hello, is this Jonathan Roumie? My name is Sarah Martinez, and I'm calling from Texas. I know you must receive countless calls like this, but I desperately needed to speak with you about something utterly miraculous that happened to my son. Jonathan looked at Dallas with an expression of profound astonishment, silently articulating the words, Sarah from Texas, to confirm that the prophecy was unfolding precisely as had been foretold during that mysterious call. Dallas closely observed Jonathan's reaction, beginning to realize that something far more complex and inexplicable was occurring than a mere coincidence or a random fan call. Sarah continued speaking on the other end of the line, her voice gaining strength as she delved into her extraordinary narrative, clearly compelled by an urgent need to share an experience that had completely transformed her family in the last 24 hours. Mr. Roumie, my son Michael is 12 years old and has been battling a very aggressive form of leukemia for 8 months. Last night, the doctors told us that it might be the end for him. Sarah paused to regain her composure, and Jonathan could clearly hear the sound of her ragged breath as she struggled against the emotions threatening to overwhelm her completely. The trailer was in total silence, save for Sarah's voice emerging from the small speaker, creating an almost sacred atmosphere that made both men feel as if they were participating in something that completely transcended their prior experiences. Jonathan briefly closed his eyes, recalling the specific words of the mysterious voice regarding what Sarah was about to reveal, and mentally bracing himself to hear details that would definitively confirm that something supernatural was indeed unfolding in his life. But then last night, at approximately 2:45 in the morning, something completely impossible occurred. Michael was watching The Chosen on his tablet when he suddenly sat up in bed and said, "Mommy, Jesus is here in the room with us. He told me that everything would be all right, and that the man who portrays him shouldn't be sad." A wave of shivers coursed through Jonathan's entire being as Sarah articulated the precise hour of 2:45 a.m., the exact moment he had received the mysterious call in his Brooklyn apartment, forging an impossible temporal connection that defied all logical explanation. Dallas observed Jonathan's dramatic physical reaction with growing fascination, clearly perceiving that certain aspects of this discussion had been inexplicably foreseen by his friend. Sarah continued her narrative in a voice oscillating between awe and incredulity, as if she herself were still grappling with the reality of what she had witnessed firsthand. But the most incredible revelation was yet to unfold, Mr. Roumie. This morning, when Michael underwent his routine medical examinations, they discovered that the tumor had shrunk by 40% overnight. Oncologists are deeming this medically inexplicable. Jonathan let the phone slip from his trembling hands as he sank to his knees on the cramped floor of the trailer, his emotions finally overflowing, a culmination of hours of accumulated tension and supernatural corroboration. Dallas swiftly retrieved the phone before it hit the floor, continuing the conversation with Sarah while witnessing his friend undergo a profound emotional and spiritual metamorphosis before his very eyes. Jonathan remained kneeling on the floor, his hands covering his face as he struggled to process the magnitude of what was unfolding, acknowledging that his life had been irrevocably transformed by forces that utterly transcended his previous grasp of reality. "Sarah, this is Dallas Jenkins, the director of the series. Jonathan is quite overwhelmed at the moment, but I want you to know that your call arrived at the most opportune moment for him. Could you elaborate on what Michael shared? If Jonathan Roumie's story resonated with you and illuminated the truth that God continues to communicate with us today, please give us a like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the notification bell. And tell me, have you ever experienced a moment of supernatural divine communication? Or are you currently navigating a crisis of faith, much like Jonathan did? Share your experiences in the comments below. Type "I believe in miracles" if you hold the conviction that God still intervenes in our lives. Please share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that miracles are still possible. Your personal narrative has the power to transform a life. May God bless your journey.